I'm Cory Farnsworth. I'm the extension agent in Grand County, Utah. So that's the Moab area. You can see here, this is some of what my county covers in this picture. We go from about 3,800 feet in elevation all the way to a little bit over 11,000 feet. Just in my county, quite a bit of elevation change. So in 2019, I attended the Society for Range Management meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And that was when I first heard about virtual fencing. And they were talking about using it in the UK and Australia, and a lot of it was quite flat paddocks. Um, and my brain starts moving. I'm thinking, how could we ever use this in my country? I mean, because back to the picture here, uh, can can those collars relay with those towers in a way that the cow is going to get those instructions or not? So I learned about GPS and the telemetry services with virtual fencing. Those of you guys, I'm assuming that everyone knows about virtual fencing, but just basically, um, uh, boundary is able to be drawn on a map on the computer. There's a beep boundary, if you will, and then there's a shock boundary, if you will. So when the cow approaches that first buffer zone, the collar starts to send a beep to the cow, and that's as a warning that they're getting too close, they're gonna get shocked. If they approach that second buffer zone, then they receive shocking. It's a one-way fence, so when the animal goes all the way through, if she decides to come back through because of herd pressure or because was herded back in or whatever, then it doesn't shock her on the way back. And so in that way, it's a one-way fence. Only holds the cows in. And then when we were first learning about this and the process that we've gone through, we've been using vents. They've been using towers to communicate. So instructions are uploaded to a computer. Those instructions are sent to the tower. The tower sends those instructions to the caller, and then that caller holds that information until any new information is sent from the computer to the tower to the caller. And that caller stores the data needed even if they're outside of the tower range. Okay, so when we first started using this, well, right before we started using this, the July 2021 Pack Creek wildfire occurred in our area. For my area, a 9,000 acre fire is huge. Since last year, or this year, sorry, we actually had almost a 16,000 acre fire. So it's starting to become more of an issue. But in this area, we decided we needed to replace 10 miles of fence on the Forest Service land. And all of that was on one permittee's allotment. And as you guys know, there's restrictions on aspen regrowth. Until the aspen is reached a height of 6 feet or a density of over, I want to say that it's 500 stems per acre, that cows need to be kept off of aspen regrowth after a fire. They also need to be kept out of an area that's been burned until the seeds have resprouted and the vegetation is safe enough to graze again. Which a lot of times they're labeling that as 2 to 3 seasons of full complete rest. And then on top of that, you have the fence that needs to be fixed to keep the animals in the right locations. And just the fences alone, and we're not talking about all the other range improvements that were taking place there, the spring developments and stock ponds, all those kind of things. Just the fences alone, um, at the time at 2021, we were looking at $26,000 a mile. So for 10 miles of fence, for this guy, he's grazing 150 or so animals, and that's a lot of input money to fix in order for allow him to graze again. So we started looking at, can we use virtual fencing? So we had a meeting put together. We reached out to almost all of the virtual fence companies that we could find. And at the time in 2021, Vince was the only one. I mean, we're still going through COVID, so we're having COVID restrictions. The technology is relatively new. We're trying to do it for commercial industry and not necessarily just for research. So we're having a hard time finding somebody that would do this. We finally got a representative to fly out from Vince. We had This is in my country. We don't have a ton of ranchers, but we had 50 plus ranchers show up. They had traveled from 3 hours away to this meeting to hear this guy talk about virtual fencing because everybody's heard about it. Everyone wants to know: can it work? Is it feasible even? So when we first started, we were looking at about $40 a collar and $10 a battery. Originally, we were told the batteries could last anywhere between 6 months to 2 years. We'll get more into that. A tower was going to cost about $12,000. Depending on your area, you might need 1 to 2 to maybe even 5 towers, depending on your topography. Most of the virtual fence companies will work with you on setting up what that looks like. And once they get them set up, then you know a little bit better how the range actually is, compared to just a GIS estimate. So that kind of varies. The battery life, we're more reasonably 6 to 9 months instead of 6 months to 2 years. But in order to collar 100 cows, you're looking at $17,000 instead of $264,000 a fence. And that's a pretty big deal. So we were working with 150 cows. So we had several more meetings. I was working with the Forest Service at the time. I should probably clarify. So one of the big issues was, can the Forest Service allow this? And so we were working with Vince, and we were working with Forest Service uppers, and we were working with the ranchers. We met at their cabin, talked with them one-on-one. They gave us all their concerns. We talked about our concerns. We went to the Region 4 directors, and we talked with our district ranger. We talked to the forest supervisor. We had a lot of issues and a lot of people that didn't want to try it. Originally, we were looking at putting some funding towards the virtual fencing from the Forest Service or from USDA, and they ended up backing off on that, not wanting to purchase that. So what we did was we said if the ranchers were willing to spend that money as a trial, then we would support that trial by allowing them to do it. So the Forest Service, or not, sorry, the rancher bought the towers and the collars. And one of the other things that we were concerned about originally was who owns the data. So if the Forest Service was to buy the tower, is that FOIAble? Can someone request that information and that data? And we didn't really want to be a part of that, and the ranchers didn't really want that information shared in case something happened. So I think that was the best decision in our circumstances. One of the problems that we were coming up with is, how do you get a tower to all the places you need it to be, and how do you decrease the amount of towers in order to decrease the cost? So we were working with Vince, and they came up with putting a tower on a trailer like so. This is a little ATV trailer, so it's not a huge trailer. It's not a huge tower. In theory, it works a little bit better than what we found it works. It's hard to take up or to put up and take down and reset up in a new location. The theory would be that you could put this tower on a trailer. You could collar your cows, put them out there within the vicinity of the tower, and then as the cows move, you could move the tower. Now, the tower needs to be with the cows in order to send any new instructions from your computer to the collars. So your collars will only hold, at the time, it was 16 directions, basically, so up to 16 fences in that. And if you had more fences than that, you need to upload that data throughout the season. So the idea was, we'll move the tower with the cows, and then they'll always have the new instructions. And then also, your collar is sending data on how often that cow's collar is reporting to the tower. will show up on your phone or your computer when you're looking at your cow locations. And so you'll see, and I'll show you in the future here in a couple of slides, but you'll notice that some cows have checked into the tower and you have a fairly accurate and up-to-date location of that cow. And there's other cows that are going to be down in a canyon that are not transmitting data to the tower, and you'll have their last spot where they were seen from the tower, but you won't have their new location until they come within contact of the tower. So having more towers is helpful, especially if all of a sudden you decide I need to take down this fence because I'm running low on feed, and only the cows that have been in contact with that tower will get those new instructions. So how we started, they collared 150 yearlings. They trained them for 36 hours. You can see they had two different training sessions. This is 2 different years they've done it. But the first year on this left picture and the second year on the right picture, um, basically the idea is put them in a pen where they can see the hard fence, and when they approach it, that fence beeps at them. And then if they're actually touching that fence, or depending on how they set it up, they can get the beep, they can see the fence, and then they can get the shock. So they can kind of associate the shock and the beep with an actual hard fence. But 36 hours worked, and I'll say the fence on the left picture is not in super fantastic shape. This is probably one of the best um, uh, kept fence lines in the picture. Everything else you could easily crawl through it. So it kept all the cows in even when they were testing it. So that's great. Um, More pictures of the cows. You can see the collars here. You can see the chains on the collars. The chains are how they're getting the shock. They've had all different kinds of issues with different types of collars that they tried to use, and the chains are working the best for vents. They had cows flipping collars inside out. They had cows um, moving the collar so that it was not shocking them, and even a regular dog collar, you have those kind of problems. So the chain allows contact on that cow at all times. Okay, so you kind of see here just how this was set up. You don't. One thing that's important is you don't always have to have a virtual fence, especially if you have a hard boundary. So you kind of utilize the landscape, utilize your good fences so that you can see, or so that you can use less virtual fencing and more of what's there. So it really helps you get to know your landscape a little bit better. So in this picture here on the very left, you can kind of see that um, they only did buffer zones on a couple sections, and that kind of really cuts down on battery life. Is how often those cows run into that barrier is going to increase how awake that battery needs to be in order to send a shock or a beep and communicate with the tower. So the closer they get, the more communication with that tower is going to be as well, to check the GPS signal. But you can see here in this middle picture, the white zone here is the buffer zone. You can make these zones as big or as small as you want. They decided to make the beep zone a lot smaller than the shock zone. You can do vice versa. This is several hundred yards actually, so the cows have got to go through quite a bit of beeping in order to get a shock. And then you can actually see, um, you could go into the website here and click on these cows and see which ones actually test it more often than not. So that's helpful as well. So this is some of the country they're running in. You can see here they'll go almost to timberline this is Mount Tukanigavats in Moab. They'll go almost to timberline, and then they'll go all the way down in this middle picture, this ring of rocks. Actually, let's see if I can get this laser pointer. This ring of rocks right here, we call this behind the rocks. And they actually go clear over here down into the 3,800 feet elevation zone. So quite a bit of elevation difference and quite a bit of steepness. So this is part of the burned area that they were in. You can kind of see here just a little bit more of how they decided to fence this area. They decided to do 2 zones. So if a cow went through one, and then went through another one that hopefully they'd only go through one if they escaped one was what their goal was. And they had pretty good success that way. Here in this picture, you can see the cows' different colors. I want to say that the blues, I can't remember right offhand, but one of the colors has reported to the tower sooner than the other colors. So as they time out, it might be a couple days, it might be a couple hours based off of what your settings are. But it'll show you which ones are current on the map and which ones you have their old stamp. And then on this right picture here, you see all their different allotments and how they have them set up. They didn't have very many cows escape, so it was working pretty good for them. Another feature here is this is this shows a time lapse of how your cows have used the area, and they can actually even come in here and say like click on one cow and show you how that one cow has used the area, or they can look at the average. So this is their whole herd, how they use this pasture particularly in here. And what they found is like, oh man, we've got a lot of spots that there's a lot of feed in that they don't go to, and we're getting other spots that are hammered. So when they're coming out with the BLM or the Forest Service range cons, they're coming out here and say, well, you're at 80% utilization here, but you're at 0% here. It makes it easier to see where to put some water or where to do some extra herding, or maybe even they could put another boundary here and cut this into two pastures and utilize this one a little bit more heavy. So that's been really helpful for them. And then as well, they said that their favorite thing is that these collars allow them to find the animals and know where the animals are. But not just that, is that this allows you to see where the animal went to get to the area that it is. So there are several spots they found, like how in the world does a cow even get up there? And because of this, they've been able to get up into certain areas and actually get their horse up there, taking the cow trail that they couldn't find in this. A lot of times this is a slick rock sandstone, and so it doesn't leave a trail. So that's been important for them. So then we had another group, Tyler and Sean. So the first group was Justice and Lowry Red. This group here is Tyler and Sean Ivins. They're actually in San Juan County mostly. But we had these both at the same time. So we had the Reds that wanted to keep the cows out of the burn area, and then we've got the Ivins that want to keep cows out of watershed fencing areas. Now these watershed fences are supposed to be controlled and maintained by the Forest Service, but due to elk and snow and neighboring cows and everything, it's been really difficult for them to keep those cows out of those areas. And then they border a permit with the Ute tribe that has no fences and they can't keep their cows out. So they went ahead and tried. They had 230 cows. They trained for 4 days. They have quite large acre or pastures in this area. I'm gonna try to speed up through this a little bit, but this is where they trained in this middle picture here. It borders an alfalfa hayfield, and they said when they have a hard fence there, they always have cows get out and get in the alfalfa and bloat and die. And this year, when they tried with the virtual fencing, this is when they're training them, and they didn't have any get out. So that's amazing. They said they didn't had no losses. That alone paid for their collars for that year. Then they go to the mountains. One thing that they found in the mountains is because of the steep topography, your buffer zone, it has to be a lot bigger in order to cover the area this way, horizontally. So if you put it like several hundred yards on a really steep mountainside, those cows have got to travel almost double that in order for the GPS to pick up that movement. So you've got to have a little bit larger buffer zones on those steep topography areas. Um, we talked a little bit about some of the pros, location of every cow. Knowing where they are saves a lot of time and work, and I'd add money as well. They don't have to pay for riders as much for the riders. They know the travel path. We had a lot of problems with the public calling saying, "Hey, cows are in the wrong area." With the virtual fencing, they were able to keep the cows where they wanted to. The public stopped calling the ranchers and the Forest Service. That was great. We were able to keep cows out of the new aspen growth, which is huge because cows love new aspen. So does everything else. But we were able to go in and say, yeah, no cows have been here. There's been no depredation on the aspen. We checked for tracks, we checked for sign, and then we were able to go back and look at the maps and show that, yep, none of them have been out there. Um, the physical fence flaws, as far as like snow, weather, fire, elk, someone leaving a gate open. We're in a high tourism area. People leave gates open all the time. None of that is a factor with virtual fencing. They don't affect it. That's great. The one thing that we did have issues with is when you start seeing the magnetic field from the sun, when you start seeing the northern lights. A couple times we've had a couple of those episodes that have knocked the towers out of service. And we've had a couple times where we've had towers struck by lightning and they've had to be replaced. It keeps cows out of campground areas, heavy use areas. They're able to distribute them a little bit better. They've been able to keep cows out of larkspur and areas that are dense with larkspur. Their cons, they're really struggling with the battery life. So it works really great if you work with your cows 2 times a year and you have places where you can catch your animals and collar them. But a couple of these guys are only able to get to the cows once a year or once every 9 months or so. So they're starting to see a lot of dead batteries by the time that rotation comes around. They found they all needed more towers than what they were first estimated. The limitation of the software, they're really hoping that eventually it can hold more than 16 points. Is and that way it would eliminate several towers. Um, One thing is to have an app on your phone that would correlate with the map that Vince uses. So like an Onyx or an Avenza or something like that that would show you your location in relation to the location of the cows would be nice. They found that when they started working with Merck, they started having a lot. Vince sold out to Merck, for those who didn't know. They started having more issues trying to get a hold of people due to short staffing. Um, Mechanical area errors. The keeping the collars on the animal was the big thing. At first we were worried about keeping collars from choking those animals. I actually watched one just last week. Walked up to a bank of dirt and scratching his neck on a tree, and it just grabbed that collar, and he didn't jerk hard at all and just ripped it off. And so I think they're having more problems keeping collars on than they are choking cows. Um, I talked about lightning strikes, geomagnetic storms. The moving of the fences doesn't work as ideal as it does in your head yet. I think we're getting there, but it'd be nice to just say, hey, let's move fences on such and such a day, and every caller knows that. But because the callers have to be coming in contact with that tower in order to get those instructions, it doesn't work super great yet. But as far as future of virtual fencing goes, so we started with 200 cows in San Juan County and 150 cows in Grand County. And we've just added 250 more collars to the Ivans herd. Lowry Red has 1,000 cattle, and he always says, I went from a hard no to a soft no, and his daughter, who's going to start running the operation, she's going from a soft no to a soft yes as she sees it work. We had buzz baits that this was a little bit old. They've actually added 500 collars to their cows. Harley Bates added 150 collars to his cows. We have 1,000 collars on the way to the Daltons, 800 collars on the way to Matt Red. To me, as an extension agent, what I see the value is I think it's great to do all these different research and show how it works and show things that don't work well or how could we improve here. But to me, what's the big value is seeing these ranchers talking to their neighbors and asking, hey, is this working or is this a load of BS? And they're going back and they're not only saying, yeah, it's working, they're going and buying more collars. And so to me, that's showing that it's working. If the buyer is happy about it, I think that's huge. Yeah, there's going to be things that we can overcome and work towards that can better the system. But the people are buying in, and the agencies are supportive of it, and so I think that's great. Um, I don't think we'll. I think we'll go ahead and end here, and then we'll turn the time over.